Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, there was international confusion today after a Russian journalist who was widely reported to have been shot dead in Ukraine appeared alive and well at a news conference in the capital, Kiev. The Ukrainian security services said they'd staged the apparent assassination of Arkady Babchenko to protect him from an imminent Russian attack. Jonah Fisher reports now from Kiev. There is flash photography in his report.
Is this the greatest comeback since Lazarus? 19 hours previously, Arkady Babchenko was announced dead, most likely assassinated by Russians. Now, to gasps of disbelief, he was back, with a lot of explaining to do. Mr. Babchenko, of course, had not been assassinated, but had in fact been a willing participant in a security service operation.
I would like to express big thanks to the security service of Ukraine for saving my life. As far as I know, preparations for this operation have been carried out for 2 months. I was informed a month ago.
Outspoken and a fierce critic of Vladimir Putin, it seemed yet another example of the long arm of the Kremlin taking out its opponents wherever they live. This was the scene outside Mr. Babchenko's home in Kiev last night, as the police announced that the famous Russian journalist had been shot in the back and killed. Friends queued up to pay their tributes, glowing obituaries were written, and politicians lined up to point an angry finger at Russia. We were told a man with Russian links had wanted to arrange the killing of Mr. Babchenko, but had now been arrested. Quite where Mr. Babchenko goes from here is anyone's guess. An apology to his wife, for sure, and then perhaps he'll make a start reading those obituaries. For now, people here in Ukraine don't know whether to laugh or to cry about this. Journalists went from, in the space of just a few minutes, from mourning the death of a colleague.
Oh, I'm so sorry. We appear to have lost Jonah Fisher there.
In a scenario that spy thrillers would find hard to match, the Russian journalist Arkady Babchenko, reportedly murdered in Kiev last night, turned up alive and well at a news conference this afternoon in Ukraine. The Ukrainian security services said the murder had been staged to expose Russian agents in their country. Mr. Babchenko's wife was not in on the subterfuge. She'd said her husband was shot in the back as he left their apartment. He has now apologized to her. Here's our Europe editor, Matt Fry.
This is a tale in 2 chapters. It starts with the crime scene in Kiev, the Ukrainian capital. The police is here because Arkady Babchenko, a Russian dissident journalist, has just been shot in the back by an assailant outside his front door after popping out to buy a loaf of bread. His wife is distraught. They had fled to Kiev to escape the long hand of the Putin regime, to be safe, to speak truth to power. The world is moved. The finger of blame is pointed at Russia. Even Boris Johnson weighs in on Twitter with outrage. Back in Kiev, at the nocturnal crime scene, the editor of Babchenko's Crimean opposition TV station looks shaken. He's convinced that he'll be next.
On the way here, I received confirmation that Arkady had died. I think it will not be the last of these killings. I think the next to be killed will be myself.
At his office, friends and colleagues erect a makeshift shrine. The Russian embassy is defiantly festooned with pictures of the dead man. And here he was, Arkady Babchenko, a brazenly outspoken critic of Putin and the Russia that elected and supported him. A former soldier in Chechnya, the horrors of war turned him to journalism and against the regime. Hours before he was reportedly gunned down, he posted this on Facebook. Exactly 4 years ago, I escaped death when I couldn't get on this Ukrainian army helicopter in the east of the country. It was shot down by Russian rebels. 14 died. I wasn't on board. A second birthday. Turns out that the man these people had come to mourn has had a third birthday. This afternoon at around 5 p.m, the dead man, resurrected, suddenly appears at a news conference about him, organized by the Ukrainian security services. Turns out the fake murder was a sting operation to catch the people Babchenko was convinced would eventually try and kill him.
As far as I know, this operation was prepared over 2 months. I was made aware of it 1 month ago. Over this month, I saw how the guys worked, how they dug things up. We were in constant contact and worked out the details. One person has been detained as a result of it all.
In his office, Babchenko's colleagues have exchanged their tears of sorrow for tears of joy. But one wonders how his wife, widow for less than a day, now feels. Apparently she wasn't in on the operation. He may have gone on a journey, as the hoodie puts it, but he and the Ukrainian security services took everyone else for a ride. At what cost? To the memory of journalists genuinely killed for their work, to the safety of what is indeed one of Russia's most dangerous professions.
Fry reporting. A little earlier, I spoke to Russian journalist Konstantin von Eggert. I asked him what he made of the story.
This near Hollywood story is not that surprising to me, but of course I'm very, very glad he's alive.
You say near Hollywood story. Indeed, it seems very far-fetched and hard to imagine they really caught somebody who was going to try and kill him.
Well, we don't know, and we'll have to see what kind of proof the Ukrainian security service finally provides. I think they have to show the suspects, they have to explain what happened, but if we believe that the operation developed for 2 months, I think that probably this is not that far-fetched. And I suppose that with a string of murders in Kiev, of people that were, let us say, quite awkward and unpleasant in the eyes of the Kremlin, it's probably not that surprising that such operation was undertaken.
Well, now, of course, there is an uncomfortable truth, and that is that the Russian foreign minister, Mr. Lavrov, spoke the truth. We have not killed Mr. Babchenko, he said. So he certainly said it as it was.
Well, yes, but I think that the question is whether the preparation for the murder really happened. And then Mr. Lavrov's words may well look in a different light. I think generally we look back at quite a lot of other occurrences in the last few years, and even, let's say, 10 years since the murder of Miss Anna Politkovskaya, an investigative journalist who wrote about Chechnya in 2006. And, you know, we see quite a significant number of people that seem to have perished in extremely dubious circumstances.
Well, Konstantin von Eggert, thank you very much. As we say, let's watch this space.
Will do. Thank you.
Well, I'm joined now by Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister for European Integration, Ivana Klimpoush-Syntsadze. Minister, just explain to me how faking Babchenko's death allowed you to catch people he thought were trying to kill him.
Well, you know, we here in Ukraine today are feeling absolutely proud that we have ensured that Arkady Babchenko did not die from the yet again the hybrid attack from the Russian Federation, and that our security forces and our security services have been able to protect him, and moreover to detain those that have been standing behind this terrible crime that could have happened on our soil against the person who is anti-Kremlin and who has fled the Russian regime to seek some savage here in Ukraine, in Kyiv.
But how did faking his death allow you to do that?
How did, could you repeat that, please?
How did faking his death, how did the sting enable him to evade his killers? It's not clear to me.
Well, the thing is that our security forces have actually warned him a month ago. They've been working on this case for about 2 months, and they warned him a month ago that unfortunately there is a attack being planned on him, and so he cooperated very closely with our security forces, and they were prepared for this attack. So therefore he was cooperating with the Ukrainian security service in order to help them to detain those ones who were standing behind this terrible crime to be happening, this assassination that had to happen on the territory of Ukraine. Moreover, it seems that the whole assassination was even planned for earlier date for the Champions League final, which was happening here in Ukraine, and obviously that would not be something that would immediately work for the image of the country. And that's why I think Arkady was happy to work together with the security forces and to both prevent the crime, both have people who are responsible detained, and also to ensure that people in Kyiv are on the safe side.
The details are very unclear. Did you know about the details of the operation?
No, I did not, and I think it's the right thing to do. There were only a couple of people in the country who were aware of this operation being prepared, and I think that is also speaking to the high level of professionalism. Those who are part of this of the operation, who have to know according to their professional skills, according to their professional responsibilities, have to know about this. So they have been part of it, and they knew.
The Prime Minister knew or not?
The Prime Minister? I think you should have asked him in particular. I didn't bother to ask him whether he knew or not. But I know that people, you know, who are dealing with the Ministry of Interior, Security Service, the Prosecution General, they all were part of this operation, and so therefore they knew. And I'm sure the President was also informed about this.
How fearful would you say journalists and public figures are about Russian aggression in Ukraine?
You see, I think that actually the first reaction that we've received yesterday from the people to this, to the knowledge that Arkady Babchenko was assassinated, was speaking to the fact that there has been much higher resilience already developed and critical thinking that was already developed in the Ukrainian society, because it was immediately the reaction of people that probably this has not been happening. This did not happen without Russia's intrusion, without Russia's upper hand. I mean, the attack and assassination, as we thought yesterday, of Arkady Babchenko. And those were just regular Ukrainian, ordinary Ukrainian citizens who were pointing out to particular traces that could have been seen in such an attack. And obviously, we also have seen.
Isn't the problem, though, that in this could be seen as a coup for Vladimir Putin in this era of fake news? This is the most flagrant example of fake news, isn't it?
No, I don't think that it has anything to do with the fake news. I think it has to do with the special operations, and I am sure that if, for example,
it was a made-up death,
if there was a chance to ensure that you would have the responsible people for the attack in Salisbury on Mr. Skripal caught in the similar way, I think your security services would have followed the absolutely similar pattern. So therefore, they have been working on their responsibilities under their mandate, within their responsibilities. So I think it's extremely important that it was immediately once the responsible people have been detained on the territory of Ukraine, it was immediately presented to the Ukrainian public what actually has happened and what was going on.
Okay.
So
Minister...
it's not about fake news. It's about responsibility and national security of the country.
Okay. Minister, thank you very much for joining us, and sorry about the difficulty with the line there. Thank you. John.
Well, earlier I spoke to Misha Glenny, author of the book McMafia, which exposed Russian organised crime. He's an authority on Eastern Europe, and I started by putting it to him that, well, this did have the ring of fiction.
It's quite extraordinary, the whole thing, for Arkady Babchenko to just pop up 24 hours later.
After the BBC, no less, has declared him dead.
The BBC and many other outlets, including the New York Times. I don't know whether Channel 4 News was involved in that as well.
We weren't on air at the time, fortunately.
So the extraordinary thing about this is that it is a stunt. Now, Vasily Hrystal, who's the head of the SBU, which is the Kiev equivalent, the Ukrainian equivalent of the KGB, has said that this was done in order to catch people who were plotting to kill the journalist. But personally, I immediately say, what exactly is going on here? We need to know some facts, first of all. We need to know who the person that they claim to have detained is and what, if any, links there are to Russia. But my own feeling is this looks like Ukraine trying to highlight its hostility to Russia, its closeness to the West.
So this security man, Vasily Hrystal, is a sort of pro-Western figure.
Well, he's the head of the SBU. Whether that makes him pro-Western, pro-Eastern, pro-Northern,
but it doesn't make him pro-Russian, does it?
No, it certainly doesn't make him pro-Russian. Poroshenko will have a loyalist at the head of the SBU. It's probably the most important.
Because it's his version that we're now.
It's his version. He held the press conference. He introduced Arkady. It's worth pointing out that Arkady has every reason to be frightened. He is an extreme irritant to Putin and other people, including Kadyrov, the president of Chechnya. And people like him in the past have been oft, in various parts of Russia and Ukraine.
But this is a win for Putin, isn't it?
It is a win for Putin, yes, because
he didn't kill him.
Because essentially an accusation has been made against Putin, which has, clearly very little substance, unless Ukraine can come up and prove to us why they thought that Arkady was about to be murdered. It merely reinforces Putin's narrative that they are encircled and that Ukraine and the West are involved in a conspiracy towards legitimate Russian interests.
You mentioned the word narrative. The problem is, of course, that this now constructs a kind of story that you might have written.
Yes, well, it is. I mean, I don't think I would have thought of this, actually, John. It's on one level very creative, but I mean, it means, what do we believe? I mean, I think of, as far as I know, his wife didn't know that he wasn't actually dead. And frankly, I think that's a rather terrible thing to do. A lot of people will have been mourning for 24 hours. And it's a very extreme sort of fantasy narrative for an intelligence agency to produce.
But the other thing is that it's very, very Cold War-ish. It's extraordinary to have been able to carry this off in the age of social media.
That means that, the one thing you can say about the SBU is it's not leaking. Because this has taken everybody by surprise. There was not one person who stood up and said, he's not actually dead.
Misha Glenny talking to John earlier.
We knew we lived in weird times with disinformation weaponized to disorient enemies, but the craziness reached a new level today with the exiled Russian journalist Arkady Babchenko apparently dead for 19 hours and 40 minutes, only for him then to pop up alive and well at a press conference. The assassination was just a cunning plan from the Ukrainian security forces designed to flush out real plotters. The Ukrainians seemed pretty happy with it. Babchenko's alive, A man has been apprehended and they say a plot to kill up to 29 other people has been thwarted, but at a cost. The sting ended up proving the Russians don't always lie. They were truthful in saying they hadn't done it. So it's a propaganda victory for them, and indeed for virtually anyone with a batty theory about anything. But as I say, Babchenko is alive, and it does remain true that a suspiciously large number of Russian journalists have been killed. Mark Urban's been looking at the curious developments of the last 27 hours.
It's not so unusual for a murder plot to be foiled by subterfuge. What is unusual is for a big part of the world's press to be co-opted into the deception plan, as became clear when the victim appeared this afternoon looking remarkably relieved.
Но, насколько мне известно, эта операция готовилась 2 месяца. Меня посвятили в курс дела месяц назад. И что самое главное, значит, то, что мою жизнь сохранили.
When his death was announced yesterday, there was an outpouring of emotion.
Невероятное для всей мировой журналистики на самом деле.
People left tributes near Arkady Babchenko's home in Kiev. Others took to social media. Now his friends are just hugely relieved.
It was like a bombshell. I was dumbfounded. I couldn't really think. So the fact that this was a happy end and it was a special operation stuff like that, and Arkady is alive, should not dismiss all other cases where probably Russian government was involved in killing journalists.
But in the time that the deception was racing around the world, most people simply defaulted to the information war's positions that have become so well established in the 4 years since Russia began its actions against the Ukrainian government.
У двери в свою квартиру, когда Аркадий возвращался из магазина, он получил выстрелы в спину и погиб уже в карете скорой помощи от полученных ран.
And true to form, responding to the earlier reports suggesting a Kremlin hit, the Russian foreign minister answered that knee-jerk reaction with one of his own.
Абсолютно игнорирует советы тех же западных кураторов о том, как им наводить порядок у себя дома, потому что знают, что Украина им нужна, западным кураторам, для того, чтобы продвигать русофобские взгляды и чтобы всячески создавать неудобную ситуацию для нашей страны.
Tonight, Mr. Lavrov's ministry was already calling the Babchenko affair an anti-Russian provocation, and Kremlin loyalists will have a new card to play the next time a critic of President Putin is murdered.
Presumably now, though, the Kremlin and its people, next time someone is killed, will be able to say, oh, here we are being blamed again, without any foundation, without any basis in truth.
But we have previous cases without happy ending. We had Anna Politkovskaya, the famous journalist from Novaya Gazeta. We had Natalia Stemirova. They all worked as journalists, and these incidents are directly linked to Kremlin, so we can't dismiss that. So whatever they're going to say for propaganda purposes doesn't matter really.
Another layer of disinformation has been added then to the Ukraine-Russia story today. It's always murky, and perhaps that's inevitable when so many of the players in the shadow war there are people who learnt their trade in the KGB.
Mark Urban there. Mark is with me now. So Mark, I suppose the question is, why such an elaborate plot? You know someone is trying to kill the guy, you just take him away and hide him, don't you?
Well, if you go with the Ukraine Security Service, the SBU version of it, there was something bigger going on. They wanted to engage this man who was arrested. The hired assassin who he hired informed the SBU what was going on. They used him to get this person more deeply committed and found out all sorts of other things, as you mentioned earlier, that up to 30 people were on a hit list. There was even mention in today's press conference of up to 300 assault rifles, kilos of high explosive, a regular storm of mayhem that this person was allegedly about to unleash. Now, Their argument was the plot had to go ahead because they wanted to intercept communications that might have followed a successful hit. That's the theory.
And you have to let it go all the way to sort of get the best communications.
If you buy their version of it.
Do you think we would have done it?
Well, I think in Northern Ireland in the 80s and 90s, there were lots, I mean, literally dozens of occasions when there was credible intelligence of a murder plot. And there were lots of occasions where these plots were disrupted. There are lots of ways of doing it. You can send the person away on a holiday somewhere. You can create a diversion by police outside his flat, checking vehicles at just about the time the assassin is supposed to come along. There's all sorts of ways you can disrupt these plots without actually faking someone's death and enlisting everybody from, one can say maybe the journalists are pretty expendable in this, if you're trying to save one. But even the likes of Boris Johnson, of course, all sorts of people were chiming in on what they believed might have been a Russian-inspired hit.
Mark, thank you very much. Well, joining us now from Kiev is the Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine, Ivana Klimpush-Tsintsadze. And a very good evening to you. Thanks for joining us. Do you accept that Ukraine will take a knock to its reputation as a result of this deception?
When we are trying to assess this situation from the world which is democratic, free and developed, I think we are missing one point. I think we are coming from the presumption that security should be taken for granted. It's not the case in Ukraine, and security is not the luxury that we all enjoy all the time. So therefore, we have to ensure that with having security, we also have to deal and ensure democracy and procedures and institutions and so on. So, and unfortunately, we do not have any, NATO umbrella to cover us, or working Budapest Memorandum assurances that would ensure that we do not have to do all the hard work on our own. So therefore, we have to ensure that we are preserving the lives of the citizens who entrusted their lives to the state of Ukraine, and ensure that we are using all the possibilities to do that. And that's what happened when the security forces, when the security services of Ukraine have, as your material has also shown, that they have uncovered the list, also additional list of 30 people who have been under, or possibly would have been under attack. So that means that this is, yes.
Well, can I just ask, you will put those people, we will see someone on trial with public evidence, so we can see that there was a plot and that you did help solve that plot with this lie last night.
Well, I think that our security services have worked very specifically under their mandate, and they've carried out their responsibilities professionally. And we have to also understand that according to the Ukrainian law, the evidence they had before, that was not enough to ensure that they would be able to deliver it to the court and have the court case full and ready. So that's another reason for such case. And also we have to understand that when we are trying to paint the picture, it's not always black and white. And if we are leaning for black and white picture, we not necessarily would get the correct answers and the right answers.
You accept that your allies, people like the British Foreign Secretary, were tweeting, support for the Ukrainian position today, and are perhaps made to look a bit silly because they weren't told. You weren't told. Very few people were told this was deception. Are you going to explain or apologise to the allies about the 24 hours of confusion they had to endure?
I think that, we all are standing together with our allies, with our partners, and we've been, with all our hearts and with all our minds and with all all our actions. We've been standing together with Britain when Salisbury attack was happening, and I think that British people, the British security services would probably, if that was the only way how they would protect someone, how they would ensure that there is no assassination happening, and how they could get additional information and get detained the people who have been behind this particular assassination attempt, they would have done the similar way in the British situation. So I think that there is a plausible explanation, and I'm sure that our security forces will be, security services and our prosecution general will be sharing this information with their partners and their counterparts immediately in different countries who are our partners, and I'm sure that we will resume the support that we believe that is needed for the country that is every single day fighting on the front against the Russian Federation and not in our own country.
Deputy Prime Minister, we need to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks for joining us. I know it's very late in Ukraine.
Thank you.
Well, joining me in the studio is the Russia expert, Edward Lucas. What was your reaction when you heard he'd come out alive?
Well, first of all, I'm delighted that he's alive, and I'm still very angry that the Russians were trying to kill him. They didn't succeed, thanks to the brilliance of the Ukrainian security services, but clearly they have killed people in the past, and that the Ukrainians, I think, are to be believed when they say that there was there was a plot going on, and that is very unpleasant.
I hear a but coming here, I think, Edward.
Yeah, I think that the difficulty here is that this is a card you can only really play once, and I wonder what will happen next time there's an assassination, and when people are trying to whip up international support and outrage over an assassination, and at the back of many people's mind there'll be a question, well, is this just another very clever intelligence sting? And it may be that the Ukrainians have uncovered something so dramatic that this extraordinary means was necessary. It's also possible they may have overdone it, and I think we'll only really know that when we get more facts.
Deputy Prime Minister there was saying, look, you would have done the same. Mark Urban described how in Northern Ireland we had a bunch of different tricks for just taking people out of the way if we thought there was a plot against them. How normal is this kind of behaviour?
This is not. I mean, this reminds me of Accidental Death of an Anarchist, sort of sequel set in Ukraine. There's an air of sort of heightened unreality about it, and I think it's very easy for us in the West, feeling basically pretty safe, Salisbury aside, to lecture Ukrainians who really are fighting and dying every week. So I don't want to be in a position of criticising. All I'm really saying is that we need that the evidence is going to have to be pretty strong to convince people that this was the right thing to do.
This was the right way of doing. Well, look, let's go back to Kiev, because there's an Ukrainian journalist there, Maxim Erestavy, and thanks for joining us, Maxim. So many in the West have been pretty critical of this approach of the Ukrainians. Do you feel it was a justified deception?
Well, I think this evening, after a really tremendous 20 hours, I'm happy that my colleague is alive and his actual assassination was prevented. And I think this is the most important thing, and the shared feeling that we all have here, not only Ukrainian journalists, but also Ukrainians in general, because unfortunately, having or seeing justice to be served in the name of journalists in Eastern Europe or Ukraine is a very rare case, and I think it's a groundbreaking development. Could have been handled better in terms of communication, probably, but again, I don't want to be in that position actually without knowing the contents of the case to make that very hard judgment.
Your Deputy Prime Minister's point was, we don't, you know, it's very dangerous there. You're on the front line of this, and I wonder how dangerous it feels to journalists, particularly those covering any kind of Russian activity.
Well, I think that there is a big gap in perspective when, you know, a lot of my foreign friends today criticize this development. They don't actually understand when you become a journalist in Ukraine and I became a journalist 15 years ago, you know, having this lingering thought on the back of your head that you're going to be assaulted or killed and there's no justice will be served in your name is part of the package. Therefore, when somebody sees a development like that and sees that the justice is actually, you know, somebody was protected and that person was journalist, this is remarkable, and I think that's why there are so many people in Ukraine, Ukrainian journalists, you know, celebrate this.
Edward. I think that's absolutely right, and it's terrific to see the Ukrainian authorities going to such lengths to protect Mr. Babchenko. But there have been an awful lot of very brave Ukrainian and Russian journalists in Ukraine who've been killed, and nothing much has happened about it. And I just wonder why the Prosecutor General has shown such terrific zeal on this, but not on some of these other ones. And I just wonder if maybe there's a little bit of internecine political warfare going on here, and the prosecutor and the security service are very keen to show what they can do, because it gets them a few political points on top of the doubtless admirable other motives they have.
Look, putting aside the tactic here, let's talk about the bigger cost in terms of trust and discourse. And Maxime, I wonder if I can ask, on Russian television tonight, a commentator has said, and this proves the Skripals in Britain, it's fake news, they've just made this up because it's a stunt to humiliate Russia. Do you think this damages Western integrity and Western credibility in the kind of disinformation wars?
Well, I don't think we can equalize the actions that are done by many actors in the region, including Russia, in terms of disinformation and fake news, in something that is closely related to protecting somebody's life. I do believe, though, that is actually a big gap between the actions of both sides. At the same time, I don't deny that there are actually huge problems and huge issues and huge questions we have to Ukrainian law enforcement agencies, SBU that is corrupt, or General Prosecutor's Office that is politicized. But again, today's events, whatever the reason was for them to do that, it still landed a concrete result. We saved some lives.
Last one, briefly, Edward. We don't want Russian habits to become pervasive in the West, do we? Where sort of the lies on one side just turn into lies on the other side, and the sort of hapless public have no idea whoever they can believe on anything.
That is the great danger, that in trying to fight the Putinist machine of lies and money, where everybody plays on the same team, that we end up Putinizing ourselves.
So plenty to talk about there with Andrew Pearce and Kevin Maguire. And one story dominating, really, and it's really the most bizarre story that
so unusual to get the same story on the front of the Sun, the Star and the FT.
And actually the same headline on the front of the Sun that we can see there, You Only Live Twice, and also on the Star, which we can see as well, that has exactly the same headline. So
great headline.
Remind everyone what this story was about, because
this is the most extraordinary public relations gaffe, in my view, by this stupid journalist. We were told yesterday, we'd all written and been concerned that he'd been murdered by the Russians. He's a Ukrainian journalist who's been very critical of Vladimir Putin. His body was found in the stairwell of his home by his wife, apparently riddled with bullets, covered in blood. The Sun has a picture on the front of apparently him. 24 hours later, Lazarus-like, he comes back from the dead. Oh, he wasn't dead at all. He faked it because they wanted to expose a Russian plot to assassinate him, and they now think they've arrested somebody who was going to hire a hitman. Insanity, because now Putin is going to say this is fake news. So the UN report, which said just a couple of days ago that Russia brought down that plane over Ukraine, they'll say that was fake news. They'll say the Salisbury bombing, poisoning, where the ambassador here has already been blaming the British Secret Service for it. That'll all be fake news. It's a PR disaster.
Would you agree with that? I mean, the Russians have come out and have called it, obviously, yet another anti-Russian provocation. So this idea that it's propaganda, they will say, and they'll also say it's all part of these countries who are anti-Russian and faking stories.
Yeah, the Russians go around the world with a lot of provocation of their own, and are provoking Ukraine too, having annexed Korea and sent undercover soldiers to fight with rebels in Ukraine. But nevertheless, it's calamitous, absolutely crazy, mad, nutty. The whole point of being a journalist and in the media is you've got to be truthful wherever you can, not invent fake news. And if you're the Ukrainian government and you want credibility, do not produce a stunt where you fool the entire world for a while and you gift wrap a propaganda victory to your opponent, Putin, in the Kremlin. It is absolutely mad. Broadcasters, your good selves included, newspapers, my own on a website, they on social media, you on social media, listen on the airwaves, sites everywhere. You're told another anti-Putin critical journalist has been assassinated. Others have. It's actually happened, and it's faked. It's crazy, and they've yet to convince me and show me any real reason how this somehow helped them unmask the plot.
They're suggesting that by doing this, they were able to make the critical arrest after 2 months of investigation.
Well, I don't understand that. And how? This plot is so bizarre. He didn't even tell his wife. So his wife, we're told, genuinely thought her husband was dead. Well, yeah. And so did his daughters.
And let's take a look at The Guardian
dead.
when we do that, because, again, they've got a picture of him rubbing his eyes. And it was an extraordinary moment when he appeared in that news conference, and there are pictures of his colleagues discovering that he was alive and obviously celebrating, because it's fantastic news that he had not been
Because that's the initial reaction you would be. You're relieved your colleague's not dead.
What do you make
Well,
of
I
that?
think within 10 minutes they'd have thought this through and thought, this is a catastrophe for us, for their news organisation. I'm not sure if he's a TV journalist, radio journalist or newspaper journalist, but the media outlet he works for, this is going to do it's a catastrophic blow to their credibility, I'm afraid, because the editors must have been involved in it.
Well, no, maybe they weren't. No.
That's true. We don't
they've been duped too. Now, look, the Guardian says he looks sheepish. I think in that picture he does. He almost looks as if he's crying. But it's just the level of deception. Now, in journalism, subterfuge is sometimes permissible if you're trying to uncover corruption, criminality, and so on. That's acceptable. Now, I could see the argument, well, fake his death, you catch the assassin. I don't then see how that can be true, because the assassin can't kill somebody if they're supposed to be dead by somebody else. It's just...
However, if the Ukrainians they say they've been working on this investigation for a couple of months, it could be that had they surveyed somebody crucial or critical over that period of time, they may have gathered a great deal of information. But is it possible they can produce evidence of any kind?
Well, let's see. But if you've got an assassin, you normally want that assassin with a gun, catch him red-handed. Well, if you've killed them, what's the assassin supposed to do? They can't do what they were intending to do, so you can't catch them in the act.
The person they've arrested was the man who was going to hire the assassin.
So
it's even one further removed, allegedly paying $40,000. It's a complete dog's breakfast.
Well, all right, they might be laughing in Kiev, thinking, ho, we got you, Putin. You thought somebody was dead and they're not. Well, I'm sorry. The joke is on the Ukrainians.
He's going to make hay out of this, because he's a brilliant propagandist anyway. The Kremlin are very good at black propaganda, and by God, they're going to milk this.
And we're reminded, of course, of the relationship between not just Russia and Ukraine, which is at a low, as you imply anyway, but also Britain and Russia is not good now as well. And again, they have accused Britain of fake news over the poisoning.
The Russian ambassador here, who's deranged, who is doing a very good impersonation of Comical Ali from the Iraq War, the first Iraq War, keeps saying that Britain was responsible for the Salisbury poisoning. Well, he's going to be off away. He's going to be off again now on a voyage of fancy, saying, "Look what happened in the Ukraine. It's even worse here." The BBC, the Sky, the Daily Mail, we're all behind it.
Look at Yulia and Skripal. She looks really fit and healthy. We all said how amazing it was when she came out of Salisbury, apart from the tracheotomy scar. You're going to have conspiracy theorists saying, "No, was she ever poisoned? Was she ever ill? Have they staged it rather like they have this?" You're going to go every time a journalist is killed who's anti-Putin, critical of Putin, and they will be because there's a record of it. You say, are they really dead? Are they going to produce them in a week or a month or a year? And it is madness.
For his family, apparently not being in on it, and learning themselves.
How does he repay? How does he make this up to his wife? Do you think a bunch of flowers is going to be enough? I don't think so. I know where he'd be wearing them in my house.
Babchenko is going to regret this. And he's got to regret.
I think he should. If his bosses don't know, they should fire him.
Let's take a look at the Mac cartoon as well, because we've got front page stories across the way. Of course, the Mac cartoon as well.
It's a joy.
Read it out to us, Andrew.
Look, it's the England dressing room. The World Cup is coming up, as we know. in Russia, why we're going is beyond me. If we get knocked out of the World Cup early, we could always fake our own deaths, say the England players. So the brilliant Matt cartoonist onto it straight away. Fake news, fake death. It's a PR disaster.
It's a gift to cartoonists, caricaturists, satirists, comedians, undoubtedly. But the truth is a casualty. It is a casualty of this, and it just beats me. It just
maybe we will have to do that because we will get knocked out early, I presume.